Syria. Iraq begs for more help for fighting ISIS there. And Boko Haram fighters capture more than 30 people in northern Cameroon. President Obama says the media is exaggerating the threat of terrorism. It comes on a day when another possible threat to global stability, Ukraine, is front and center. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Jennifer Griffin's at the Pentagon with an update on the ever slimmer prospects of avoiding all-out war in the former Soviet Republic. But we begin with the chief White House correspondent, Ed Henry, and some interesting comments from the president about terrorism. Good evening, Ed.
Indeed. Good evening, Brett. The president dismissed terror threats as largely being media hype, saying if it bleeds, it leads. But his former military intelligence chief says radical Islam is expanding and the president's strategy is off. At a news conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel dominated by threats around the world, President Obama barely mentioned Islamic State terrorists.
With regard to ISIL, Germany and the United States remain united in our determination to destroy this barbaric organization.
And when it comes to confronting ISIS, the president is downplaying the threat, declaring in a Vox.com interview the media is overhyping terror and climate change could be a bigger long-term problem.
It's all about ratings. And the problems of terrorism and dysfunction and chaos, along with plane crashes and a few other things, that's the equivalent when it comes to covering international affairs. And climate change is one that is happening at such a broad scale and such a complex system that it's a hard story for I think the media to tell on a day-to-day basis.
That comes after Friday's speech by his national security advisor, Susan Rice, claiming the U.S. cannot give in to alarmism. And the president said at the National Prayer Breakfast, Christians also committed terrible deeds hundreds of years ago.
That's not the kind of leadership we need to destroy this cancer in the Middle East that's growing rapidly.
This comes as the former chief of the Defense Intelligence Agency is intensifying his criticism of the president's ISIS strategy.
And I think that there's confusion about what it is that we're facing. It's not just what has been defined as 40,000 fighters in the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. It's also a large segment within this radical version of Islam that is actually, is threatening our way of life.
As ISIS put out another propaganda video showing British hostage John Cantley declaring the terror group's gains are breathtaking, in the Vox.com interview, the president compared his role to a mayor who's fighting ordinary crime.
It is right and appropriate for us to be vigilant and aggressive in trying to deal with that. The same way that a big city mayor's got to cut the crime rate down if he wants that city to thrive.
Now, the president went on to talk about vicious zealots who he says randomly shot up a deli in Paris last month. Of course, he left out that it was a kosher deli that was specifically targeted. Brett?
Ed, President Obama was asked about House Speaker John Boehner's invitation to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to address Congress. That complicates basically an already rocky relationship between the two countries, at odds over the best course going forward with Iran. Here's what the president said today.
I don't want to be coy. The Prime Minister and I have a very real difference around Iran sanctions. From the perspective of U.S. interests, and I believe from the perspective of Israel's interests, although I can't speak for, obviously, the Israeli government, it is far better if we can get a diplomatic solution. So there are real differences substantively, but that's separate and apart from the whole issue of Mr. Netanyahu coming to Washington.
Well, what are you hearing about this address?
Well, the real difference he's talking about is about Iran's nuclear program. The president wants to keep talking. Netanyahu, a lot of Republicans, and some Democrats like Bob Menendez, by the way, want more sanctions against Iran. And a key moment at that news conference today was the president, when I was sitting there, he said, what's the rush in terms of sanctions? Well, Netanyahu had his own news conference today, and he said the rush is he's worried about a bad deal with Iran in which they might be able to keep their nuclear program. Now, the prime minister is vowing he'll go ahead with this speech anyway, while here in the States, we heard from the first senator saying he'll skip it. Socialist Bernie Sanders says he'll boycott. We expect other Democrats might join him, Brett.
Ed Henry, live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you.